Welcome to The Gamer's Encyclopedia, an informative series detailing the histories of long-running or important series in gaming history. Today, we're going to talk about perhaps the best Nintendo-made franchise about anthropomorphic animals piloting advanced spacecraft to defeat a giant monkey head. Yeah, Star Fox. What can I say? When you lay it out like that, it sounds fucking stupid, but the Star Fox games have captured people's attention right from the get-go. The original Star Fox used, at the time, advanced technology to do 3D polygons on the Super NES, and it got a lot of attention for its advanced graphics and gameplay, and not so much for the fact that the idea of a fox, a bird, a bunny, and a frog battling a giant monkey head in space is clearly the work of a diseased mind. The original game turned heads by the use of the Super FX chip, a coprocessor built into the game's cartridge that would boost the abilities of the Super NES past what it could normally do. There were a few other games that used the Super FX chip, but Star Fox is the most famous. There was also a Super FX2 chip, which boosted the system's capabilities even further, and it was used in only 3 games. The Super NES port of Doom, an Olympics game called Winter Gold, and Super Mario World 2, which showed that the technology could be used for more than just 3D polygons. The downside was that it made the games more expensive both to produce and to buy, which is probably why there's just as many games that were developed with it and then cancelled as the ones that were actually released. One thing to mention is that before Nintendo started this series, there already was a game called Star Fox on the Atari 2600, which was developed and published by Mythicon back in 1983. This game obviously has no relation to the Nintendo series, but it's worth mentioning as there were some trademark issues. Basically, Mythicon never trademarked the name Star Fox in America, but they did trademark it in Europe, which is weird because the game was never actually released in Europe. So when Nintendo came around, they were able to trademark the title Star Fox in America and Japan, but not Europe. So the first 2 games in the series were called something else in Europe until they got it cleared up. This is interesting because in the European versions of the game, the team of characters is referred to as Star Fox in the games themselves, because the trademark issue was only for the title of the game, not for the name of a fictional cadre of furries. Anyway, let's take a look at the original Star Fox. Star Fox, in Europe known as Star Wing, was developed by Nintendo EAD with help from Argonaut Software and published by Nintendo. It was directed by Katsuya Eguchi and produced by Shigeru Miyamoto. It was released for the Super NES in Japan on February 21, 1993, in America on March 23, 1993, and in Europe on June 3, 1993. On game rankings, it has a score of 88, the second highest of the 6 games rated on there. The story of Star Fox is, in the Lilat system, everyone is an anthropomorphic asshole, and there's this giant monkey face called Andros who is terrorizing everything. So General Pepper, leader of the planet Corneria's military, does what he does best, absolutely nothing. Instead of mobilizing the military against Andros, he hires a group of mercenaries called Star Fox to take on Andros. You start in Corneria, and you have to work your way toward Venom, where Andros is. Instead of just going directly there, you stop at several planets and other points of interest along the way to fight Andros' forces. You have a choice of 3 paths to take. They all lead to Venom, but they give you different levels. Basically, this is the difficulty setting. And also, it gave the game some replayability. I mean, maybe you beat a game on normal, and maybe you feel like doing it again on hard, but maybe you have other things to do, like brushing your teeth with bourbon. But in a game like this, the hard path and the easy path and the normal path are all completely different levels, basically making you want to play all 3. Even the final Venom level differs based on which approach you take. Although there are 4 characters, Fox, Falco, Slippy, and Peppy, you only ever play as Fox, and there is no multiplayer. The other characters offer support and dialogue, but more often they just get chased by enemies which you have to shoot down. If one of your wingmen gets shot down, they are unavailable for the rest of the game, so I guess they're dead. Later games in the series would have them retreat and then return later, but in this you pretty much see their ships blow up and then they're fucking dead. Yeah, fuck you guys. The gameplay is a simple on-rails 3D shooter that you've seen a million times before, but this was sort of a new thing at the time, and the Super FX chip was a big deal. I remember the commercials for this game driving me nuts, and I'd played it several times at demo kiosks before finally getting it. Star Fox was a big success, and Nintendo immediately started working on a sequel, but that got derailed somewhat. Now, I only cover released games in this show, so no vital stats card or anything, but it is important to talk about the cancelled Star Fox 2. Star Fox 2 was not a game that was worked on for a bit, and then Nintendo decided to cancel it for reasons such as poor quality, poor sales projections, or technical difficulties. No, the game was actually finished, or at least as close to finished as a game can get without having gone gold. It had box art, it had promotional materials, and GamePro even put out an issue which had a strategy guide for it. The game was even rated by the ESRB and can still be found on the ESRB website. So what happened? Well, the producer this time was Shigeru Miyamoto, and it would have come out in 1995 at a time when Nintendo was working hard on the Nintendo 64. Miyamoto pulled the plug on Star Fox 2 due to the fact that he felt 3D games like Star Fox should be on the Nintendo 64, while the Super NES should be used to make 2D games. A lot of the assets from Star Fox 2 would be adapted to other games. For example, the camera system wound up in Super Mario 64, and the next Star Fox game would use a lot of the gameplay elements and characters that were set to debut in it. So much so that it's been said that a third of the next game, Star Fox 64, was basically Star Fox 2's code. And even as late as the DS game, they were using elements from it. The game was so finished that there was even talk of releasing it for the Virtual Console, though that never happened. Nintendo wound up regretting not releasing the game, as the next one was still 2 years off, which would be 4 years after the first game. And really, they could have had one to bridge the gap. But anyway, let's talk about that. Star Fox 64, in Europe it's called Lylat Wars, was developed by Nintendo EAD and published by Nintendo. It was directed by Takeo Shimizu and produced by Takaya Imamura. It was released for the Nintendo 64 in Japan on April 27, 1997, in America on July 1, 1997, and in Europe on October 20, 1997. It was released for the iQ player in China on November 21, 2003, and it was released for the Wii's Virtual Console in America on April 2, 2007, in Japan on April 17, 2007, and in Europe and Australia on April 20, 2007. The Nintendo 64 version of the game is ranked on Game Rankings with 89.01, the highest of the series. Star Fox 64 was an early N64 game that honestly still holds up in a lot of ways. It takes everything about the first game and improves it. It still has the same basic gameplay, except the path you take getting from Corneria to Venom is a lot more open-ended. How you do in a mission decides which path you take from there. For example, if you beat the first stage normally, you'll go one way, but if you discover an alternate path and boss and you do it that way, you'll wind up somewhere else. This also gives the game a lot of replayability, and there were multiple endings depending on how you approached Venom. This time around, there's also a rogue group of mercenaries called Starwolf, which are basically the Star Fox team's nemesis, and you'll have to fight them at certain points in the game. Starwolf were set to appear in Star Fox 2, but wound up here instead. There's also a mode called All Range Mode, which takes away the rails and gives you a small area to fly around in for certain battles or stages, and you could use other vehicles such as a tank in certain stages or a submarine in one level, though in the tank levels your wingmen are still in the R-Wing planes. Star Fox 64 also changed the dynamics with the other characters. They are fully voiced and have more defined personalities, and you don't just constantly save them, but occasionally they'll save you, and they each have their own purpose. For example, Slippy can analyze a boss showing you the life bar, but if he's not present during the battle, you won't see the enemy's life bar. If you lose a wingman, they're unavailable for the rest of the mission, and I believe also the next one, but will eventually return. There is also multiplayer this time around, though no co-op. It was limited simply to deathmatch. Star Fox 64's story makes no mention of the first game. It pretty much has the same plot as the original, basically making it a remake instead of a sequel. But it expands on the story by giving it more background. For example, it talks about the original Star Fox team headed by Fox's father, James MacLeod. Man, you're a Fox, and you name your kid Fox? Kind of a dick move, to be honest. James is just Fox with shades on anyway. It would yet again be some time before the series returned, another 5 years, and this time it would be with an outside developer, and it would be a completely different type of game. Yeah, it's time to talk about Star Fox Adventures. Let's take a look. Star Fox Adventures was developed by Rare and published by Nintendo. It was directed by Lee Schuneman and produced by Chris Stamper and Shigeru Miyamoto. It was released for the GameCube in America on September 23, 2002, in Japan on September 27, 2002, in Australia on November 15, 2002, and in Europe on November 22, 2002. On Game Rankings, it has an 80.78, the fourth highest of the series. So what happened here? Instead of an arcadey action game with planes and shit, it was a weird sort of adventure and RPG hybrid with strong influence from Zelda. Fans had been wanting Fox to get out of the plane for a while, and as a matter of fact, a secret mode in Star Fox 64's multiplayer let you play as the characters on foot using guns. So this does that, but it's not what you'd expect. Instead of running around shooting things with a blaster, you're smacking things with a staff, and there's really a heavy focus on solving puzzles. So what went on? Well, after the success of Rare's partnership with Nintendo on such games as Donkey Kong Country, Banjo-Kazooie, and Conker's Bad Fur Day, Rare started working on another late-era Nintendo 64 game, Dinosaur Planet. This was a game that was going to play a bit like Zelda, but with more elements of an adventure game, with a heavy amount of puzzles. Sound familiar? The game got cancelled for the Nintendo 64 due to the system reaching its end of a lifespan, and it was being reimagined for the GameCube, when guess who showed up again? Yeah, Shigeru Miyamoto. He mentioned that the game's main character, Saber, looked an awful lot like Fox MacLeod, and suggested that the game be retooled as a Star Fox game. And due to the fact that this pretty much would double the game's sales, that suggestion was taken. A lot of the characters from Dinosaur Planet, such as Crystal and Tricky, would still appear. As a matter of fact, Tricky had already appeared in Diddy Kong Racing on the Nintendo 64. The game was originally going to be called Star Fox Adventures Dinosaur Planet, but it was later shortened. One thing about the game that was dropped from its Nintendo 64 version was the ability to play as Crystal. Originally, you'd use an item to switch between Saber and Crystal, which I assume would also be useful in solving puzzles. In this game, you actually start off as Crystal, but she gets captured pretty quickly, and then for the rest of the game, you're Fox. The Crystal section of the game pretty much serves to give a tutorial on the gameplay as well as to flesh out the story. So yeah, the story. You're Fox, and you're sent by General Pepper to the Dinosaur Planet because it's literally flying apart in pieces like some kind of Yes album cover. You have to recover Spellstones and Krazoa spirits to put everything back together and rescue Crystal and save the world. You're not allowed to use your gun because it's supposed to be a non-violent mission, but you find Crystal's staff pretty early on. There's a village that serves as a hub for the rest of the game, which has a shop and some other amenities, and you pretty much have to find a way to open the path to one of the chunks of the planet, fly there in your R-Wing, and then find a way to reintegrate it with the planet. The game's defining characteristic is probably the graphics. Honestly, it still kind of holds up. I mean, obviously the textures don't, and it wouldn't look great on an HD TV, but it had some great particle effects, especially the water. Honestly, this was the first game I thought had water in a video game looking realistic. The gameplay is a lot like Zelda, but it's pretty simplified. The combat seems like it's going to be great, but it's pretty limited. The game really isn't about fighting enemies, it's about solving puzzles for the most part, which is pretty well handled. The R-Wing parts? Yeah, tacked on. The last boss? Ridiculous and tacked on for sure, but this was an enjoyable game. It pretty much split the fans down the middle between people who enjoyed it for what it was, despite the flaws that it had, and people who lamented Star Fox being turned into something so weird. To those people I say, examine the concept. Star Fox was already weird. Anyway, one last interesting thing to say about the game is that it was the last game by Rare to be released for a Nintendo system, not counting that weird remake of Diddy Kong Racing for the DS. And you know, it was originally on Nintendo 64, but when it was reimagined as a Star Fox game for the GameCube, it was supposed to be a launch window release. As a matter of fact, if you happen to have the box that your GameCube came in, assuming that you had one from when it was first released, you can still see a screenshot of it on the box, as well as some other Rare games like Donkey Kong Racing and Kameo Elements of Power. Those games got delayed over and over again, and at the time we didn't know why, as Rare's output on the Nintendo 64 was so high and so full of great games. But for the GameCube, they had a lot of plans, but only released one game, and quite a bit later than planned. So what happened? Well, you already know, Rare was in talks to be bought by Microsoft. They managed to curl out Star Fox Adventures first, but the rest of the games using Nintendo characters were cancelled, and original games such as Kameo were reimagined for Xbox. These days they make Kinect games. You know, it's interesting. A lot of people think that it's sad how Rare used to be so great and now they're crappy. But the honest truth of it is they started out crappy. Look at their oldest games. Yeah, Battletoads cool and all, but for a while they were known mostly for licensed titles based on game shows, bad sports games, and shit like Super Glove Ball, which was published by LJN. Yeah, they also developed several other games published by LJN, such as Who Framed Roger Rabbit, A Nightmare on Elm Street, and Beetlejuice. Yeah. Well, Star Fox Adventures did great, but there was backlash, as I mentioned, and for the next one, the game would return back to basics, sort of. Let's talk about Star Fox Assault. Star Fox Assault was developed by Namco and published by Nintendo. It was directed by Toshiyuki Nakanishi, Hideki Okazaki, and Yutaka Yoshida, and produced by Tsuyoshi Kobayashi, Shigeru Miyamoto, and Takaya Imamura. It was released for the GameCube in America on October 25, 2004, in Japan on February 4, 2005, in America on April 29, 2005, and in Australia on June 16, 2005. On Game Rankings, it has a score of 70.73, the lowest of the series. This time around, you're called in to battle Andross' nephew Andrew, but that plot thread doesn't last long. Before too long, the real threat is revealed, an insectoid race called the Aporoids, who are infecting and assimilating everything around them. The Aporoids have been compared by a lot of people to the Borg from Star Trek, which is interesting as the Borg were originally intended to be insectile rather than humanoid. The more you know, eh? Anyway, this one is much more story-driven. Instead of multiple paths, it's linear with a heavy use of cutscenes to move the story forward. It's also considerably darker in tone than previous games, with a bunch of familiar characters getting assimilated or killed, though Namco throws the whole thing in reverse towards the end, with most of the affected characters coming out of it okay. Except Pigma, but who likes him anyway? Crystal is now a member of Star Fox, and this time around, it's said to be more like the classic games. Except not. Yes, in some ways, it's like Star Fox 64. You can use an R-Wing or a tank, but there's also on-foot parts, and those parts are kinda clunky and hard to control. There's several levels where you have a sort of sandbox area to play around in, and you can switch between foot, R-Wing, and Landmaster tank to complete whatever your objectives are. For example, one level is on a big ship, and you're supposed to go in and infiltrate it, but if too many enemies are spawning outside, you have to jump in the R-Wing and fight them off for a while. Star Wolf also returns, and you can even team up with them. Such as there's a part where Fox is standing on Wolf's wing for an on-rail shooting bit, or the final level where the two teams all take on the Aporoid Queen. This one I found to be really exciting, and I like the story quite a lot, though I could have done without so many tower defense type of levels. To give it a modern take, it's sort of like Call of Duty Black Ops 2 with those Strike Force missions. It feels kinda like that, only they're not optional. Overall, don't let the low game ranking score fool you. This one is definitely worth playing. Hell, it's not even that low. It's a 70.73. That's not exactly shitty. One thing to mention is that while this was being worked on, there seemed to be a lot of buzz about a possible arcade iteration of the game. Though this was never happened, and as far as I can tell through my research, it was never even planned. I think it was an assumption on the fans' part due to the fact that Namco was releasing the arcade versions of Mario Kart at the time, and the previous year, Sega's F-Zero was released both for GameCube and the arcade. Anyway, onwards. Once again, though there were some controversial aspects, Star Fox Assault was a successful game, and the series would return once again, this time on the DS. Let's take a look. Star Fox Command was developed by Q Games with help from Nintendo EAD Group No. 2 and published by Nintendo. It was directed by Dylan Cuthbert and produced by Takaya Imamura. It was released for the DS in Europe on June 19, 2006, in Japan on August 3, 2006, in America on August 28, 2006, and in Australia on September 21, 2006. On Game Rankings, it has a score of 75.56, the fifth highest of the series. Now, my comments on this one will have to be more limited, as this is the one that I don't have, and I've never played it. Anyway, Star Fox Command involves the Star Fox team defending the Lilat system from an invading force called the Anglar, who apparently have been around for a whole time just waiting to fuck shit up. This one focuses a lot on the individual characters and their relationships, and from what I can tell it has 9 distinct endings, which has led to a lot of speculation as to which is the true ending. Although there was some talk of a sequel which might clear it up, Takaya Imamura threw everyone a curveball by saying this is the end of the story and the last game in the series. I mean, what? Okay. So, well, that was the end of the series proper, but there's one more release to talk about. Star Fox 64 3D was developed by Q Games and Nintendo EAD Group No. 5 and published by Nintendo. It was directed by Dylan Cuthbert and produced by Tadashi Sugiyama. It was released for the 3DS in Japan on July 14, 2011, in America and Europe on September 9, 2011, and in Australia on September 15, 2011. The download version came out slightly later, in Europe on October 4, 2012, in America on October 18, 2012, and in Japan on November 1, 2012. On Game Rankings, it has an 81.71, the third highest of the series. Once again, not much to mention. It's basically Star Fox 64, but with some enhancements. Obviously, it's in 3D, and there's an original Nintendo 64 mode and a 3DS mode, which takes the new controls into consideration, where you can control the game using the 3DS gyroscopic controls. There's also tweaked multiplayer and whatnot, but like I said, it basically is Star Fox 64 with a fresh coat of paint. Well, that's it for now. If there will be more Star Fox games in the future, that would most likely be great, but for now, it seems that we'll have to settle for things like re-releases or remakes. Join me next week, and we'll talk about a series that may have exploding tits in the future.